The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this podcast, I'm going to go over the two different types of backwash valves out there. You have the push-pull type, and then you have the multi-port type valves, and I'll go over which ones I prefer and which ones you should install on your particular filter type. Leslie's Pool Supplies is a proud partner of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right. Now, most of the backwash valves you're going to find out there fall into those two categories, either a push-pull piston type valve or the multi-port valve. Although Pentair and Jandy do make two that don't fit these categories. Pentair makes the Full Flow XF, and this is a kind of a hybrid backwash valve that's for the Quad D filters and also for some of their sand filters. And basically, it kind of operates like a backwash and a sand filter with the backwash mode without the multi-port function, so there's no waste or rinse or any of that. And I consider this pretty much a hybrid backwash valve. You're not going to find it on too many pools. You'll find it on the pools with a Quad D filter installed, and some of the newer sand filters will have this valve. But I definitely prefer the multi-valve over this particular valve here. And then Jandy makes kind of a funky backwash valve for their D filters. It's called the Jandy 8034J. And it has a regular Jandy valve on top, so it looks like just a regular valve, but that's actually their backwash. And so you'll find this on some Jandy D filters, if they do put one on at all. A lot of times you're going to find the Jandy D filters with no backwash valve at all. But if they do install one, you're going to find this weird black Jandy backwash valve. It's the Jandy 8034J. And again, it has the Jandy handle on top, and you turn it to backwash it, of course, with the pool off to open it up and then close it. And it's pretty expensive, and I think that's why a lot of installers that do put Jandy D filters in don't use this particular backwash valve, and they'll put the Jandy piston backwash valve in, which they make also. And so just be aware that there are these outliers out there, these two particular backwash valves. So mainly you're going to see the push-pull valve, Jandy, Hayward, and Pentair Waterway. All of these have these push-pull valves. It's basically this handle and this piston, or basically it's a piston on a handle that sits in there, and this is how you backwash the pool. And they're commonly just called the push-pull backwash valve. Someone may refer to it as the piston type backwash valve, but they're all the same. Basically, the backwash a pool, you would turn off the pump, then you would turn the handle to open it, and then you would pull up on it, and then you would turn the pump on, and that starts the backwash process, which is the water will flow inside the grids and push everything off the grids, and that's why you'll see a lot of dirt and D come out. And then when you're done, you turn the pump off, push the piston down, turn it to lock it in place, and then everything should be fine. Now, there are problems you're going to run into with these. The main problem is that there's two O-rings in there. Well, there's actually three. There's one on the handle, so if it's leaking on the handle, that's harder to replace, and I always just replace the whole piston at that point, because then I realized that the handle's coming loose. I've replaced those before and had the handle snap off, so you definitely want to replace them when they start to wear off on the top, especially if that O-ring on top leaks and you see water leaking out of the top of the push-pull backwash piston. Replace that. And there's two O-rings that sit inside there, and as the chemicals definitely have an effect on everything on your pool, these O-rings will actually expand out or crack, and so when you go to pull up the piston, it's going to get tougher and tougher to pull up because these O-rings are expanding. And so the way to actually counter that is that when it starts to get really stiff, what you want to do is take out the piston, loosen the ring, or sometimes there's screws holding it on if you have an older Pentair one, and then you want to take out the piston and change those two O-rings. Sometimes you just change out the whole piston in some cases if it's getting old, and it's not really expensive. I think you can get most of these backwash pistons for $60 to $80 or $90, and the O-rings are maybe like $8 at the most for the whole set, and very easy to do. And then once you put it back in, everything should run fine. And sometimes if the O-rings are definitely worn out, you're going to see water dripping out of the bottom of these particular backwash valves, and this is an indicator that the O-rings are worn out and you have to change them. And once you change them, you won't see the water dripping. The one danger is if you have like a P-trap connected to the backwash, you won't really see the water dripping out of there. So the pool could be draining down. You may think there's a water leak, but it could just be the backwash valve not closing all the way. And I think that these push-pull backwash valves are great on DE filters. I really don't think that you should put these on a sand filter, although some installers do. I really like the multi-port valve for the sand filter for a number of reasons, and the main one being that you can vacuum the waste with the multi-port valve, and you can't do that with this one here. You shouldn't use the push-pull valve to drain water out of your pool either. So some people would use this to drain some water out. So let's say you had heavy rains and you wanted to drain some water out. You can't really open up this piston and leave it in backwash mode for 20 minutes to drain some water out, because what happens is that the water in this case goes inside the grids and it pushes out. And so if you leave it on for 20 minutes, you're definitely going to damage those grids. And so that's why you don't want to leave the backwash valve open for more than a minute and a half, 2 minutes at the most, because you could potentially damage the grids in there if you leave it open any longer. And you don't really need to leave it open that long for backwashing. So don't use this to drain water out of a pool. You only want to use this backwash valve to backwash the filter. You can't actually hook up a vacuum to the skimmer and vacuum with the backwash valve open, thinking you're vacuuming to waste. You're not, because everything you vacuum goes inside the filter grids, and so when you put it back in filter mode, everything comes back out into the pool. So you definitely don't want to vacuum in with the backwash valve open in this case. And so the piston type backwash valves are very easy to manage and handle. Now if you ever run into a situation where you have the piston broken off in there and you can't get it out, the handle's broken, the O-rings are jammed in there, there's no way to get it out. If you have a DE filter, what you can do is take all the grids out, the full grid assembly out, and you can actually reach these O-rings inside to the bulkhead and clip them out with some wire cutters and pull the O-rings out. It's one of those last ditch efforts to kind of get it out, but that's one way to do it, is to go in from inside the filter. Of course, if it's a sand filter, you can't do this because it's full of sand, but for a DE filter, you can definitely take everything out and try to reach those O-rings from the inside of the filter itself. Next, you have the multi-port backwash valve. You're going to find these mainly on sand filters, although on some DE filters you'll find these. Hayward is one of the biggest manufacturer of these multi-port backwash valves, and you're going to find a lot of them on the Hayward filters. I like them because you have multiple modes on here. You have the filter mode, then you have the waste mode, then you have a close mode, a backwash mode, recirculate mode, a rinse mode, and a filter mode. One thing you want to do is turn the handle one direction only on these, and so when you go from filter to backwash, you want to go clockwise, and then from backwash to filter, continue going clockwise back to filter mode. And also when you backwash a sand filter or DE filter, it's always a good idea to go from filter to backwash and then turn everything off again for a third time and go to rinse, and then turn everything, let it rinse for about a minute, and then turn it off and go back to filter mode. I think rinsing really helps with a sand filter and a DE filter to get any of that waste that may still be in the line out of there, and it's a really good feature to have that rinse mode. What I really like about these multi-port backwash valves is that you can actually vacuum to waste on them, and so this is really a good thing for a sand filter. You're going to find sand filters are very inefficient as a filter, and when you go to vacuum a lot of dirt into a sand filter directly in filter mode, it's going to clog it up pretty quickly. So the waste mode is a great feature to have, because then you could hook up your manual vacuum to the skimmer, turn on the pump in waste mode, and this water will go out either to a drain or backwash hose. You're going to lose some water as you're doing this, but it'll bypass the filter, and you can vacuum all that dirt directly out into a sewage P-trap or into a drain or into your yard, wherever you're going to vacuum it out to. And a lot of the times you can't do this without this particular kind of multi-port valve, and so it's great having that waste mode. And I really like these. They're very long lasting, they're very easy to use. The handles will get stiff over time. You have to change that spring in there or change the whole top of the multi-port valve. One thing to be aware of is that there's something called a spider gasket in there. Basically how this works is that each time you turn the handle, there's like a gate or door, and it sits on top of this spider gasket. And when that starts to wear out, you're going to find that you're not going to have full closure in certain areas. So if the spider gasket is cracking or worn out, you're going to see sometimes water dripping out of the backwash of the pool filter while it's in filter mode. And sometimes it's a lot of water, sometimes it's a trickle. And that's the first indicator that that spider gasket is worn out when you have water leaking out in filter mode. You also may notice that when you backwash it and rinse it, you're going to have some dirt go back in because, again, that gate, the gate doesn't completely seal without that spider gasket that it sits on top of. And the reason why they call it a spider gasket, because it kind of looks like a spider web, because it'll keep every port separate in the multi-port valve. And if that starts to wear out, if you have the multi-port valve where the spider gasket is on top, I would just recommend replacing the whole top part. If it's on the bottom, you're going to have to scrape it out with a screwdriver and then get a new one and glue it in. And it's important that you use some kind of epoxy, waterproof seal kind of glue to glue that spider gasket down. Without that, it's going to come right off. And so scrape it really well, glue it in there, and then you should have no problem with either water leaking out of the backwash or maybe dirt coming back in because of that spider gasket having a problem. But the multi-port valve, again, is my favorite type of backwash valve because of the multi-functions, of course. That's why they call it a multi-port valve. You can put it in different function modes. And I really think for a sand filter, having a push-pull piston type backwash valve is very limiting because then you can't vacuum out the waste when you need to. And having the multi-port valve on your sand filter is definitely the way to go. And I also prefer this valve on D filters because of the fact you can vacuum the waste if you need to. And I just think these are a better backwash valve than the push-pull pistons in the long run. And I guess I should mention there's one filter with the backwash valve built into the bottom of it, and that's the Pentair 4000 series. And if you have an older filter or an account with one of these older filters, it's the 2000 series, which is a stainless steel tank. You'll see a stainless steel handle sticking out about 4 inches on the bottom, and that's the actual backwash valve. So you would push it in, you would push it one direction to backwash it and pull it back the other way to put it back in filter mode. Sometimes they're not very clearly marked which way is backwash, which way is filter. One thing you don't want to do is leave it in backwash mode when you charge up the filter. I've done this before once where I was cleaning a 4000 series filter. I put everything back together. I started putting the D in the skimmer and I forgot to close the backwash valve. And again, this was connected to a direct sewer line, so I couldn't tell that it was open. But I realized my mistake, and then I saw the pool draining down. It was down about 1/4 of an inch. So I realized I didn't put it back in. And so I turned everything off, and then I put it back in filter mode. And since the way these work is that all the water reverses, so everything goes inside the grids, all that D that I put in there in the skimmer went inside the grid. And so when I put it back in filter mode, all of that D came back out into the pool. So I had about 4 pounds of DE in the pool that I had to vacuum up. It took about 2 or 3 weeks to clean it up completely. Customer was very understanding of my mistake. But yeah, it's something that you don't want to do with those 4000 or 2000 series backwash valves. And it's very easy to leave these things open if you're not careful. And you could drain a pool down pretty quickly if you leave that backwash valve open on those filters. So these are the only filters that have that backwash valve on the bottom. But I wanted to mention that in case you have one of these or if you run into one of these filters. And again, it's made by Pentair, and that's the 4000 or 2000 series. You'll know right away because you'll see that metal stainless steel handle on the bottom. Sometimes you'll see it marked backwash and filter on the bottom. And just be cautious when you're using this to put it back in filter mode after backwashing. So now that you know the difference in the backwash types, one thing you need to know is that if you have a cartridge filter, you can't backwash it. It's just not designed to be backwashed. So if you have a filter and there's no labels on there, or maybe you don't know the difference between a D filter, sand filter, or cartridge filter, the fact that there's no backwash valve on there, any of these that I described here, if you don't have one of these on the filter, then it's probably a cartridge filter, or it could be a D filter that doesn't have a backwash valve. You'll find that the Quad D filters by Pentair, a lot of installers don't put backwash valves on those, nor do a lot of the installers of the Jandy D filters. You'll find that they don't have backwash valves either. I'm not sure why that is, but those are the two that you're going to find without backwash valves. And then to change gears a little bit, when do you backwash your filter? And let me touch on some of the times to backwash your filter. the time you want to backwash your D filter is when the PSI goes up by 10 PSI. So if your clean filter is at 20 PSI and it goes to 30 PSI, it's time to backwash that DE filter. And so you want to turn everything off, pull that push-pull piston up if you have that one, or put it in backwash mode, a multi-port valve. Turn on your pump and then run your filter for a minute or a minute and a half. And that should be sufficient to get all of the dirt and some of the DE out of the filter. Then you want to put the backwash back in filter mode and then recharge the filter with diatomaceous earth. How much do you add to your filter? Well, typically when you do your first backwash of the season, a lot of the DE dirt will come off of it, and so you want to probably put half as much as you would normally put in when you first charge the filter. So if you're adding 4 pounds to your filter, adding 2 pounds when you backwash is perfectly fine. If you're backwashing for the second time in the season, it may not be as effective as the first time, and so you can still add 2 pounds back in, but you may want to add a little bit less in there because it may not have washed out a lot of DE. You typically don't want to backwash more than 2 times before taking the DE filter apart and cleaning it. You may get away with 3 times, but if you're backwashing your pool very often, it could mean that the grids are getting really old in the pool. So the PSI shouldn't rise up that quickly. If, for instance, you have a DE filter and you backwash it, and then 2 weeks later it goes back up to 30 PSI, chances are it needs to either be cleaned at that point or the grids are worn out. You have to replace the grids. Now, if you open up the backwash and only clear water comes out, this is an indicator that maybe there's a lot of oils in your pool and everything is caked on the grids. Or this could be an indicator that your filter needs to be cleaned at this time, and so you have to take it apart and clean it. One way to get around that is to put it in backwash, turn on the filter, and then after about 20 seconds, turn everything off, put it back in filter mode, turn your pump back on, run it for 20 seconds, turn it off, put it back in backwash mode, and let it run for a minute, minute and a half for the full backwash. By doing that, you kind of loosen up everything on the grids, and you may be able to backwash it that way. But if you do that quick little back and forth and still nothing comes out, then definitely you have to take it apart and clean the grids. Maybe there's a lot of oil in there, making everything stuck on there. There could be no DE in there at all. Sometimes they'll put a filter together without charging it. But definitely you don't want to be backwashing it if there's nothing coming out. It's counterproductive. For a sand filter, you definitely don't want to be backwashing it every week either. They run better when they're a little bit dirty. So the only time to backwash a sand filter is again the same principle. After a good backwashing of a sand filter, note the PSI on the gauge, the pressure, and typically it's about 15 or 20 PSI. And when it gets to, if it's at 20 PSI and it gets to 30 PSI, you have to backwash that sand filter. I generally will let the sand filter run longer than a D filter, so let it run for a minute and a half or 2 minutes to get a really thorough backwashing of the sand filter. Then turn the pump off, put it in rinse mode, which is really important, and leave it in rinse mode for about a minute, and then turn off the pump and put it back in filter mode, and that way you get anything that's still in the line out of there, and it won't go back into the return lines. And again, don't backwash your sand filter too often. I know some people will say that backwash it every week. I don't recommend that. And if you are backwashing your sand filter very often, chances are the sand or the media that's in there, if it's not sand, needs to be changed. There's a problem with it. It's either really dirty or really old, and you have to change it out. Typically a sand filter should last, a good 3 or 4 weeks in between backwashing. And if you're doing it every week, there's definitely a problem with your filter. If you notice the PSI is going from 20 to 30 midweek even, then you do have a problem with your filter. The only exception to this with a D filter and a sand filter is that if your pool has a lot of algae in it or the water is cloudy, this could really affect your filter. And so it may seem like your filter is really dirty, and it probably is, but it's because of the algae and also because of the cloudy water that's causing your filter PSI to rise rapidly. So it's a chemistry issue you're dealing with also. So you want to clear the algae and you want to clear the cloudiness of the water, and your filter should run better. And so if you notice that your filter pressure is going from 20 to 30 very rapidly, it could be because there's a lot of algae in there. You have to clean the filter off. And then with a sand filter, you may need to flock your pool, which is the process of adding aluminum sulfate to the pool, which will clump everything up. So basically, if you wanted to flock a pool with a sand filter. So you would refer to the label of the product to see how much aluminum sulfate to add to your pool. You would add the appropriate amount. Then you would put everything in recirculate for 1 hour and then turn everything off for 24 to 48 hours. Everything should fall to the bottom, and then you would vacuum everything out in waste mode. And that's the quick and easy way to clear out your pool with a sand filter and getting everything running again. Now after your pool is clear, you can see the bottom clearly and everything is crystal clear. Then you can assess if your filter has a problem, either DE or sand. If your pool is really clear, the water is clean, and the filter PSI still goes up, definitely it's the grids in the DE filter, and your sand is probably no good in your sand filter, and you have to change both of those out. And so whether you have a push-pull piston type backwash valve or multi-port valve, these backwashing tips will work for either of those. And just keep that in mind when you're servicing your pool filter, that a DE filter, at least every 6 months, you want to take it completely apart and clean it with backwashing in between. In the sand filter, you only want to backwash that when the PSI goes up by 10 PSI, and you're not backwashing it every week just as a habit. And if you're looking for more resources for your pool care, definitely check out my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. I have a lot of helpful web pages there and some web pages on filter maintenance. And if you're in the industry and you're looking to enhance your business, definitely check out my coaching program at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right.